Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the upcoming panel discussion about heritage versus hype, the art and ethics of storytelling in a digital age. And it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome and introduce our panelists for the upcoming conversation. First and foremost, ladies first, Sin Coburn is here with us from Dissident Cigars. Sin, welcome and thank you
Hello.
very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The one and only Matt Booth from Room 101. Thanks for
What's
joining
up,
us, Matt.
guys? Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
And if ever you wonder and you love storytelling in the world of cigars, there's absolutely no way around this gentleman, Nick Hammond from the UK, storyteller, author, and bon vivant of the cigar world. Thank you for joining us. Nick Hammond, welcome.
Greetings, my friend. How are you?
Excellent. Well, what an exciting panel and what an exciting topic that we have at our hands. And I want to dive right in with you. I would start by saying that all three of you have a very distinctive persona and a very distinctive way of expressing yourselves and communicating very successfully so and very charmingly so, I have to say, in the cigar world, in your respective fields around your brands, or as in Nick's case, as an independent author, podcast host. But as we all know and love, the cigar industry is built on heritage, tradition, legacy. Yet today's day and age is all about digital, online, fast pace, and the ever accelerating pace of today's world. Our audience today lives online, and pretty much everything is driven by the digital hype, AI being the next disruptive element that even the cigar world has to face and take into consideration in our everyday lives and work. How do you personally reconcile these two worlds that seem almost like an antithesis to one another, but at the same time can so wonderfully inspire and benefit one another?
Great question. Who do you want to take that first?
To me personally, this is a question I've actually thought about a lot because I'm seeing so many people who are losing their jobs to AI. And I feel like the cigar industry is pretty hammered down with this. And I mean, there's not much AI can actually take from the cigar industry. So I'm very thankful that we are here. But there are many tools that AI can provide. You know, this can help us when it comes to social media. If we don't have answers to something because we're not savants in the field of social media, that's a wonderful tool for us to have because this industry has, you know, such a large age range. It doesn't matter if you're a manufacturer or a broker or a lounge owner. There is so many vital tools to that as well. As a manufacturer like myself, it's not something I feel threatened by. There's nothing that I've seen that makes me feel threatened by this, at least at the moment.
I would echo what Sin had to say about it. I mean, our industry is very cutely, very beautifully tucked away in its own little corner of the world in many, many ways. And I think that there are a myriad of components of our business that could never be. I mean, we could be eating our words in the next 10 to 15 years, of course, but I find it to be a space, or at least my gut reaction to that is that this is a space that will be, if it is to be touched and tainted by the artificial hand, that it will be much later than the rest of the world. I think that it has some protective shielding around it, and just the way that the business moves, and especially, you know, in the lands of the creation of the product.
Yeah, I think my take on it would be similar in that I feel quite reassured that one of the reasons I wanted to be in this world was for that reason, that it sits quite apart from anything else. And there is the capacity for genuine learning and tradition and craftsmanship that can't be faked. Now, I say that with sort of, fingers crossed. I hope it can't be faked and won't be faked. But the attraction to me, coming from quite a traditional creative background, I was a newspaper journalist, so print is what I've always done. And of course, everyone you bump into in the street today would tell you that print is dead. And I decided to go ahead and make a living from writing books. So more for me, probably. But I still have the faith that the cigar world in general, both in terms of its image, in its PR, and in terms of its practicality and creation, I think is still a very genuine place to be. I think the hard part comes where you separate the sort of false glitz and glamour that may be applied to it from the reality that actually we all live. I think that's probably where I would be suspicious.
Nick, I think that is a very important point because we can look at this topic from different angles, and where I think we can all agree, and we'll probably take a little deeper look at that in a moment, is all these tools that are at our disposition now are just that. They're tools, and it always depends on how one decides to either make use of that tool, how it could possibly be applicable to one's business or not. But they're tools, and it's about how we use them, how we implement them in our daily lives and the business that ultimately defines the results and the outcomes. You've touched on a very important subject, though, and I think that's one of the general gut feelings that's sort of going around, or one of the things that makes people somewhat worried and potentially suspicious also, is that we seem to lose grasp of not necessarily just authenticity, but how do you differentiate between what's real, what's AI generated these days, or where do we set the boundaries, and how do we define what we can still trust, and where suddenly you feel like the water's becoming very, very muddy. And in a world of social media where everybody now has a voice, in a world of AI generated audio, video, and an avalanche of content that we're bombarded with on a daily basis, how do you still differentiate? And the word authenticity, I think, is absolutely key here. And Nick, you said genuine. How do you make sure that we use these technical tools to the best of our abilities and advantages, but at the same time we keep the integrity, we keep the authenticity, and we keep things genuine so that the people can trust in what's put in front of them as content and information?
It's a big question, isn't it?
It's like drinking from a fire hose with you today, Ryan. Jesus.
Yes. Well, yes, let's try and break that one down. I think you're absolutely right. The tools are always changing and always have done. And I think if you look at them from the perspective of a toolbox that you may or may not want to dive into, that is massively helpful for people, because now you can walk around a cigar factory without leaving your home. That wasn't something that you used to be able to do. And so if you want to learn what that world is like, imagine the difference that creates in your brain. I think the problem for me comes when the tool becomes more important than the story. And so rather than concentrating on telling a story about a person, a product, a thing, a way of life, you're actually just putting on a show that might look great, sound great, do crazy things, but actually the depth of it, the integrity of that story is no longer there. I think that is where the problem lies for me.
And I think that...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say our integrity is our allure, especially in this industry. And we do have very valuable tools that can set us aside from AI. I mean, those of us like myself who live in Nicaragua, I physically go to the farms. I have a few farms, and I'm able to go there and show the leaf during dry season versus rainy season, and what the rain does to the leaf. And these are things that AI cannot replicate. We can show things like, basically on Ometepe, those of you that don't know, this is a twin volcano island. And within that island, you'll notice such a huge difference in the soil composition, from the lake all the way to the volcano. Within steps, you're seeing a difference in that soil. And those are things that AI just aren't going to talk about. So those are the things we really need to look at, because we are the storytellers of heritage and culture that's been here for so long. And that's not something AI can do. So if we go out there and we put our hands in that soil and we talk about these stories, I think that is vital and something that people aren't going to find on AI. They may be able to find soil composition, say in Condega. In general, there may be, a story about soil composition, but you're not going to find the exact stuff. And we may not talk specifically on our own personal farms what exactly is in our soil, because this is part of the secret sauce, right? But we can give an education to the people in the industry, to the consumers, and this really helps keep them in this industry and believe in what they smoke. That's very, very important. So really showing the culture aspect in a way that AI can't do it, I think, is really vital.
When social media first came into play and we started using it to amplify our message further than we could project physically as the door-to-door salesman type tactic, I always said nothing replaces the human handshake. And still I believe that today. Now, rumor has it, they are saying that in the next 25 years, the humanoid will have to do nothing to live, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be desperately hungry for human connectivity. Doesn't mean we're not going to be desperately hungry for experiences that Sin is very vividly describing in what she's saying, right? And you're never going to debit that need from the humanoid, whether they could summon the words and articulate that or not. And I think that we, again, in our industry, have a bit of insulation in that department, where it's a very, very human business. Yeah. And it always has been, always will be. Even as the machines take over, a machine takes your order at McDonald's now. Well, doesn't it a cigar shop, and it probably won't for a long time, so cigar shops will probably be banned or turned into churches by the time that happens. So, but no, I think that, and because I believe part of what you said, Reinhard, was authentic messaging. You were talking about how do we kind of skyline ourselves in a sea of white noise. Well, I mean, it's very simple. If your beacon is transmitting on an authentic frequency, people are going to be receptive to that, no matter how much noise is cycling around you, and our business is so unique in a sense where, there are traditionalists that are staunch and probably less than pleased that either myself or Sin are active successfully in their industry. But I think for the most part, I think that the people that have the wherewithal to understand, we represent evolution in the craft, And by the way, on a personal note, I've been very pleased to watch, Sin, your growth and evolution in the business. I think you are the next you're the next evolutionary step in the game. 100%. If my opinion, what do I know?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I've really dove pretty deep into this industry. That's why I stated earlier that I now have farms, and I'm really, really digging in, because just as you said, we're the next people. And yes, there is an older generation that is a part of the cigar industry, but I do believe there is a page that is turning, and we are the next group that is taking over. And we are the ones that really know about social media and what is going on with that. And studies show that the market we need to reach the most is the age group of 24 to 34. These are the people that absorb our stories and what we have to say, and they carry it on as they get older to the younger generation, and it just keeps going. And we are those people that are doing that right now, and that is so important. And we're not walking all over the older generation. We're just simply showing people a different way, I would say, that this older generation maybe hasn't looked into or tapped into. A lot of us, we get comfortable in what we do. And I'm one of those people that I like to step into things that aren't comfortable, because I know that's where true growth comes from. So that's kind of what I lean on.
I mean, I think that, at least I'll speak for myself, my creative output in this space, in this category, is my rendition of this thing that I love very much and have come to love very much. Consider it my love letter to the cigar itself, right? Or more than the cigar, the community and the culture.
Yeah.
The cigar is almost this conduit, this transmitter, this device, right? That activates this type of connectivity between people. And I've always been desperately in love with that. And I think that when you're doing something genuinely, it sings through, And so you could button this whole interview up. There you go. Done. Just do it for real, do it right. And they're going to see you at some point, shape or form. Right. So I don't know.
Well,
But
to both your
say.
points, Matt and Sin, especially that younger demographic you were referring to, we're talking about people who are hungry and thirsty for information, and we've seen it in many different industries, whether that's spirits, craft beer, coffee, sourdough baking. All of a sudden, people almost go in the complete opposite direction of what's happening on the digital disruptive evolution front, and they yearn for these analog experiences, and they want to go really deep into why certain things are the way they are, and they want to understand provenance. They want to understand the ethics and the sustainability aspects behind the product. And one could probably argue that the cigar industry has not always been the most successful in transparently communicating and conveying what's behind the craft, what's behind the art and the culture. And oftentimes we get hung up on the cultural aspect and the community aspect, but we don't do the best job in being fully transparent and sharing the in-depth information as to what's going on behind the scenes. And that, I believe, is very important. Today, consumers value honesty and integrity and in-depth information more than ever. And the big challenge and the question is, how do we all, as parts of this ecosystem, and in particular, how can brands and manufacturers communicate on these aspects without losing any of the allure or the magic of the product?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sorry, Matt. And I think you're exactly right what you say, Matt, in that that resonation of if you hit the right note, people will hear it, and it will ring true to them. I think that the issue comes when you have people or organisations that decide that the image is more important than the fact, and where you might have people who might be very good at using that toolbox I talked about earlier, but might not necessarily be very good at telling a story or willing to tell a story. They just want to look good and sound good. There's plenty of, fantastic looking videos and stuff that is eye candy, but is it really telling you anything? Is it really getting underneath the surface? And I think to your point, Reinhard, that ability to recount the real story of cigars for me is obviously the people behind it. It's people like Sin and Matt who make the cigars, and the people who work for them, and the people who work the fields. That to me is what cigars are about. And I think if you can tell that story in a really authentic way and without intervention in terms of censorship or we don't want to show this side of it. We only want to show the side of it where everyone smokes a cigar in a suit somewhere fancy. That has its place, but that is not the story of cigars for me. And I think if we can try to keep on that track rather than go down the line of being wooed by the fancy stuff, I think the world would be a better place.
And you mentioned wine, for example, and what's one thing that wine has taught us? It's to emphasize the terroir. And that's something that we can do ourselves in this industry as well, because we're working with Gen Z and millennials a lot right now. And what is one thing they care about? It's sustainability. It's what we're doing with the planet. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the cigar industry that really isn't being talked about on these farms. For one, we're working really heavily on a lot of different organic materials for our plants. And that's constantly evolving as well, because you have to study these plants and see how they react to these organic chemicals. And, there's a lot behind it. And I think that we can highlight stuff like that. I understand that the industry can be scared to talk about their secret sauce and what goes into their cigars, but there's a fine line there. But we do have to educate. That's only going to help us in the long run with also keeping this industry alive on a government level, because there's this common misconception that cigars are just giant cigarettes, and that's not the case. That is not at all what cigars are. So if we can put the people in the fields and show them that we are using organic material and that we're changing these and we're perfecting it, and depending on the season, we're doing X or X. This is important. And this is also where AI can't take that away. And so these are things that I myself am working on, because wine is wonderful at showing that. Everybody knows the wine, the fields where the grapes are being grown, and they want to go out there and see it and experience that. And the cigar industry can do the same thing. And they don't have to necessarily come to Nicaragua or the Dominican. We can bring that to them, because that history and the heritage and the culture, all of that is there. We're the people right here that have to tell that story.
Matt, where do you feel that brands and individuals in the industry can find that balance between colorful storytelling, but at the same time, what Nick was referring to, staying true to the essence of the product and the craftsmanship behind it, without exaggerating on the one end, or on the other end, undersupplying people with information that would be essential?
Well, man, I think there's there's a role that you play as a manager of mysticism, as well as a butler for information at the same time. And there is a balancing act between all of that has always felt very organic for me. I think I think if you're trying too hard, that's probably the first sign. You know, and it's like I said, I think that if you have a product of merit and a message of merit, and you turn up the volume on that message, you will be heard and you will be seen. I think it's that simple, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and how long you can stay in the game before people start picking up what you're putting down.
Sin, how do you feel about that?
Yeah,
I completely agree with that. No, that's okay. I completely agree. I mean, because if you're truly authentic, that's going to show through. People are going to pick up really quick on stuff you're not authentic on. So, I mean, you just have to be true to you and the products that you're delivering, and don't be scared to show the behind the scenes stuff. We have the power of social media. Reels are a big deal right now. What can we pack in 60 seconds? Show how the sun comes up on Ometepe and when those plants get hit by the sun. Mix it with the art of rolling. Make sure we use proper wordage, master blenders and artisans versus rollers. These are all true. This is not being inauthentic. It's how we present ourselves and make sure that we are promoting the message in a beautiful way while invoking emotion and still being authentic to yourself.
Boom.
And that also translates into respecting the fact and even highlighting the fact that we all come from different backgrounds, right? Not everybody in the cigar industry needs to be fifth generation Cuban, Nicaraguan, Honduran, or from the Dominican, right? and even this panel here, Matt, Sin, you're both stellar examples of various different backgrounds and inspirations that you then funnel into the cigar industry and present that in a very genuine way. And I think we need to appreciate and highlight that diversity and take what each and every single one of us can bring to the table with their unique story and their unique background.
Well, it's a crazy welcoming community, man. And as long as you love this, you're in. I think on every level. You know, and I think that if you enjoy cigars, you found your home amongst your new brothers and sisters that you never knew you had all around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick,
Beautifully
you,
put.
you have your finger on the pulse because you spent time with so many different growers, manufacturers, brand owners, and you see firsthand how they tell their story and how they communicate, oftentimes with you as one of the vehicles and one
Yeah.
of the tools in order to convey that message. How is that all different, and how do you think that we need to learn from some of the prime examples of how authentic storytelling can work in today's day and age?
Yeah, I think it's nice in several ways. I mean, I'm always reassured by going around everybody that, when it comes down to it, you all do the same thing, right? Not exactly the same thing, but what I mean is essentially you are making a cigar, and that is a process that you can only do in a certain way if you're going to do it right. So I think that's very reassuring because there is a tradition and a heritage there that continues to this day and will continue. And I think people appreciate that. It's ways and means of telling that story and giving it to people in the chunks that they want it in. A lot of people tell me now, oh, I'd like to read your book, but I don't read. And I think, oh my God, that's a travesty. But you have to understand people take information in different ways. So I recorded the audio version and people like to listen to audio on the way to work or something, The world's a different place. I do think there's room for everything. I think there's plenty of room for pursuing, the marketing in the way that Matt and Sin did. Very unique ways, very very clever use of technology today. And I still think there's a place for people who want to put pen to paper and give you something in a long form that makes you sit and think and takes a while to do it. I think there's value in that as well. And I think, as long as you come at it with an open heart, like Matt says, and if you love the end product like we all do, and, you're humble and you don't project yourself above what it is you're trying to portray. You are not the story. The story is the cigar. And I think if you do that, people do recognize that. And it might take you 15, 20 years, like it's taken me. But one day someone goes, do you know what? I like that guy. He writes a lot of sense. And that's how it works. It's an old-fashioned way of doing it. There are brands that come up real quick. Some stick, some don't. But I think the ones that are genuine are the ones that tend to be around the longest.
Nick, you just mentioned long format content and different mechanisms of getting the message across.
Yeah.
Earlier on, we spoke about real short format, and I think it's undeniable that the TikTokification or realification of the way content is now consumed and on the other hand produced shorten, or it speaks more to a shortened attention span and snippets, very short, condensed pieces of information. Is that something that bothers you every once in a while, or do you feel that with something that is as complex, deep, natural processes and craftsmanship that is very, very hard to condense into just 60-second videos, are you sometimes worried that we lose elements of the art and the craft by trying to shorten everything and the attention span that we seem to have at our disposition nowadays?
Short answer is yes. I am worried about that. I think personally, I feel that wisdom is gained largely through reading. and making your own mind up about things. But in order to make your mind up, you have to have a very broad and quite a deep understanding of a subject. And I don't think you can get that from a reel. Having said that, a reel is something that can educate you in a small way and get you interested to learn more, of course. And that's what it's designed to do. Now, obviously, a lot of people get their information from these shorter forms. I might argue that that could be quite a superficial way of learning, but at least it is learning. And whilst I sound like a bit of a dinosaur, I do appreciate that, you know, there's no point swimming against the tide. If people are telling you this is how they want their information, who am I to tell them to do it another way? I personally believe that if you really want to understand the subject, you have to invest time in it. But that's my opinion, and I'm not a 23-year-old, you know, who's been brought up in this world. I lived in a different world.
Nick, you and I were born in analog, my man.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, TV was a thing of...
And I'm glad that I was, because I'm glad that I know the difference.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have a very dear friend of mine, as he was telling me, his nephew is in grade school, you know, and he said that in their classroom, their new process is when they bring something in for the students to watch, there's going to be a film or something.
Yeah.
They have a second screen that they set on the side of the class that they play something completely different so they can break their focus the same way that they would watching TV and using a phone. You see, so we're already rewired, my man. Like, I agree with what you're saying, but the consumers that we're reaching are completely either rewired, or we're just wired from the jump this way, you know.
And my daughter's 18, and she watches telly with the subtitles on, not because she's hard of hearing, but for some reason that's the way she likes to take her information, and
it makes it easier for her to internalize the information.
I find it so strange. Yeah.
And then part of the craft is to remain relevant over the changing tides and years and phenomena and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And you know, there's a little bit of magic in that too. There
is, and I think the difficulty comes for people like us, maybe not for you because you're very good at it, but people like me, is that I'm not very good at that sort of thing, and I never have, you know, I didn't grow up with it, and I never learned it, so I'm a bit fearful of that new technology, and so I don't use it as well as I probably could. But I also think there's a big thing that goes back to what you said earlier about resonating. I think there's also a point at which you have to make a decision to be you and not somebody else. And I think that's hugely important, because, you know, I could pretend to be a great video guy and do all fancy stuff, but I would have to pay somebody to do it for a start. And I don't think it would be very good, because that's not where my heart lies. So I think, you know, you make a decision, you know, who do I want to be? I want to be me. And how do I want to do this? While still taking yourself outside the comfort zone, as Sim said earlier, there are things we have to do that are really hard. But I think you always also have to remain true to your sort of core essence, really.
No doubt.
I think you doing what you're doing, though, is perfect, because there's so many different people in this industry, and there are going to be people that still prefer to read books or an article. And then you have, like I mentioned earlier, the younger generation, where they are used to the fast-paced videos that are under 60 seconds. And we also need to utilize that. And I think that's where Matt and I come in really well, because we do understand what the younger generation is watching and how to perfect that. And the wonderful thing about social media is, even if we make a video in 60 seconds or less, that thankfully is still on that feed. So you're giving people little bits of information that they can absorb and retain, and then they can go back and watch other things, as long as we are doing these videos right. You know, that's why I say a mixture of, you know, slow and showing the rollers, and then, you know, a little bit of things that are faster paced. Keep them engaged, because then they're going to want to go back and watch the other videos that you've done as well, that are also educational, but relevant to what they like and how they perform in their daily lives. I mean, we have so many people who at night they're just mindlessly scrolling on TikTok. That's something that I do as well. I've learned things that I don't necessarily need to know, but my mind is jam-packed full of it because of TikTok. So I know that this technology is a great thing, but if you need to stay in your lane, then stay in your lane. You know exactly what you're doing in your field, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think the younger generation, such as ourselves, we know exactly what's going on social media, and then we just tap into those people. It's a full spectrum thing, and it's beautiful. There's no reason why you should necessarily have to change what you're doing. There's all sorts of people out there that need your content just as much as our content.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think so, and the fact that there is a library of information there, as like you say, even if it is 100 short videos, it's still a library, isn't it? And well, last night I fell down the rabbit hole of watching cookery programs, and they just kept popping up one after the other, and so it was like, you know, I was sitting in the library, but I was watching it, not reading it. So I take that point entirely, and I do think it's quite interesting, Reinhard. I do find people do sometimes come through the short form as a gateway drug. And I do sometimes get messages from people saying, listen, you know, I'm a 23-year-old kid from somewhere, and somebody said to me I should learn more about cigars, and I've listened to some podcasts and I've watched some videos. I'd really like to read your book. So it does work that way. You know, people, if you want information, it's there. You just have to dig for it, don't you?
Speaking about such segues, first I'm curious, what lessons do you think other industries, whether that's wine and spirits, food, to your point, Nick, fashion, what can other industries teach us about the authentic art of storytelling in a global world? And as a second layer to that question, where do you feel some of these other fields of interest could also be a segue through engaging content and information that's out there, but eventually it could lead you into the cigar world, so they themselves act like a segue or an introduction to the wonderful product that we're talking about and the industry that we love and want to promote?
You know, I've always said that one of the things you can count on our industry for is for it to be 5 to 10 years behind, right on time every time. And that's, quite frankly, and that's not a slight or a slam. That's something that I actually very much love about it. But if you're looking for what is the most current manner with which you know, how people are projecting themselves out there, man, go to fashion. You know, go to fashion on social media, rewire that and rework it for your formula and repurpose it. I mean, if that's what you want to do, there's a world of endless learning out there, I think, from category to category and industry to industry, you know, and you can take little healthy nuggets along your learning journey as you go. You know, some stuff is never going to work and other stuff is going to be beautifully repurposable for our combustible products, you know?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that you know, you can take your inspiration from anywhere. Nobody's, you know, there are no barriers. You can take your inspiration from anywhere. But one of the reasons I wanted to write cigar books was that I felt, from the wider world's perspective, cigars had always been ignored as an art form, which it genuinely is. And I sat there and I thought, you know, if I wanted to find a wine book, there are thousands of wine books telling you everything about every little aspect. There's thousands of art books. There's thousands of history books. There's thousands of fashion books. There aren't any cigar books. You know, there's some coffee table books and there's some history books about, you know, the brands and when they started and stuff. But nobody writes about cigars like it's a serious art form. And I thought that was just really unfair, because it is. And that's where I think we've missed a trick. You know, we've allowed it to be a sort of slightly under the radar product when it should be held up as one of the great creations of mankind.
Everybody's too busy just doing their thing.
Yeah.
And then there's, of course, the idea of protecting the sacred info,
Yeah.
which I don't subscribe to that, but I know a lot of people do. Um, I firmly believe somebody could have your entire program, but
Yeah.
they don't have your secret sauce. They can't do what you do.
No, and as we said earlier, making a cigar is making a cigar. There are ways of which you can do it that you don't need to tell anyone about. But the fact that you make cigars, you roll tobacco leaves, you age them, you ferment them, you cure them, everybody does that. So let's talk about that, and let's show everybody what an incredible thing that is and how difficult it is to get right and how badly you can get it wrong and how much money it costs and how many sleepless nights you have and what your workers go through to bring that to the table,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I often get pushback as well because, like Matt, I don't subscribe to that. So I have no problem talking about where certain tobacco came from. So, for instance, with this Molotov, we used Ometepe leaves. And I actually put in the presser that it was from Ometepe. And I had some pushback for that because that's not something you typically talk about. But I felt it was important because that island, there is so much to that island that I think people need to know about. It brings part of the allure to it. I mean, that island is made of 2 volcanoes. And like I said earlier, you have so much different soil going on there, its own weather patterns, a microclimate. So to discuss Ometepe and that leaf makes people just be in awe because you run the risk, just like with any tobacco field, but rain just completely destroying a crop, or not enough sun, or too much sun, or what was in the lake water, because on our farms, we actually use the lake water from Ometepe. So Ometepe Island is very different, and I feel that that deserves to be talked about. It doesn't need to be hidden. Yes, it's a tobacco that's hard to get, but it deserves some recognition. You have indigenous people that are living on that farm that have been there for generations, that are working on those fields, that are doing it barefoot because they believe in being barefoot, because it connects them to the story and the tradition. And a lot of farms on that island also only use oxen and horses, my farm as well. And we will never change that because there's an importance to those oxen and to those horses and to using wooden machinery, because you're not compacting the soil when you do that, as if you were using larger machinery. So those things are very important. Ometepe is always going to stay traditional, and we need to keep that alive and let people know, because in the end, what they're holding is a story, and that's going to make them feel better when they smoke their cigar. They're going to feel a connection to, even historically, the Behike and all those stories. You're still doing that. This is still a ritual. So we need to keep that alive, in my opinion, rather than hiding things, because I can still, like he said, the secret sauce can still be the secret sauce. But there's going to be an end point when we really do have to start discussing this stuff, because people care about the story, especially now with social media being so fast paced. And like Matt said, we're 10 years behind. That is absolutely true. At least 10 years behind. And then you have countries like Nicaragua that are about 50 years behind. So why are we not highlighting that? That's not a bad thing that they're about 50 years behind. That's a beautiful thing, because they're still using face-to-face interactions, and they're still believing in things that are very valuable to them that we've lost touch with. So it is a mission of mine to talk about things like that. And I know I'm going to continue to get pushback, but I feel that it is vital in this industry. And that goes all the way up to the laws that the government is trying to push through. If we keep these things hidden, then the government's going to try to continue to think that it's just a big cigarette. No, it is not. There is a lot of tradition behind this, and we are not using additives or anything like that. And no one's going to know unless we really push what is going on in the cigar industry and the people that are involved in this in all these different countries.
Yeah, and what a gift
No
of
doubt.
a story it is. Why would you not? The romance of that story is incredible. I mean,
It is.
Why would you not even dream of telling that story? It's fantastic.
And the people in the wine industry, they understand that completely.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why we haven't adopted that, because, you know, the cigar industry goes hand in hand with the wine industry, just as it does in the bourbon industry. You know, we are all brothers and sisters here, and we should take notes on what they're doing, because they are successful and they are willing to share their stories, and they take pride in their stories. If you ever go to a winery, they have nothing but pictures all over the walls about their vineyards and how they came about, and, you know, where their families came from, because they want to share those stories, and we should be doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
Definitely. As we come to the end of this wonderful panel discussion, I would like to ask all three of you for one tangible piece of advice that you would like to share with young professionals entering the cigar world on the creation, but also the consumption of information in an authentic but also aspirational way.
I'll go first. I would say, I think, be humble. I think this is, as Matt said earlier, this is a wonderful, welcoming, warm industry like no other. But you do have to pass certain criteria, and that is just be a decent person. Be humble. Don't be something that you're not. Do what you're going to say. Do what you say you'll do, and be upfront with people. And I think if you abide by that and you've got a passion for it, as Matt says, do your own thing, and you will find a way.
Yeah, man.
Completely agree. I mean, sorry, Matt.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, you know, on my end and Matt's end, you know, as manufacturers, we see a lot of things that obviously the consumer doesn't see. And there's a lot of people that want to start cigar brands. And this is happening, and they're not necessarily going to these countries. They are sometimes slapping a label on a cigar, and they don't know much about the factory that it's coming from. And that's doing a disservice to this industry. So my biggest thing is if you want to start a brand, you need to go to the dirt. Put your hands in that soil. Ask questions. An open mouth is a fed mouth. The more you open your mouth, the more information you're going to get. And this is one industry where people are genuinely willing to share information. I have not met a brand that has been like, no. You know, they may not want to answer some things because it has to do with their secret sauce. But in general, if you are willing to come here, you will learn everything you need to know. Don't rush the process, because you have to be knowledgeable in this. You can't just put a cigar together and throw it out there. You have to know why a cigar is the way it is, why you couldn't necessarily get this certain blend. And maybe it was because that growing season was vastly different. Maybe a volcano exploded, and so 2 years down the road, the composition of that leaf is going to be completely different. You have to know these things. You have to be educated, because this new generation is what's going to keep this industry alive, and we have to show that. We can't just stay in the States or whatever country that you're in. You got to put your feet in there and learn from the ground up.
100%. When I came into the business, my first stop was the factory in Donley, Honduras. 3 years later, if you had the opportunity to witness what had become of my passport, it was ravaged and war-torn by the country of Honduras. I was watching the evolutionary change of the shapes of their passport stamps, and I invested a tremendous amount of time at what I considered to be the nucleus of the product, because I genuinely wanted to learn, and ultimately, if you do this correctly, in my opinion, you will hand part of your life, if not all of your life, over to this craft in one way, shape, or form. Transmit on an authentic frequency and keep your head up. Don't let them get you down. Just keep moving. That's how I think you do it. Yeah.
Matt Booth, Nick Hammond, Sin Coburn, thank you very, very much. What an inspiring conversation and panel it's been. Thank you for your insights, for everything that you shared, and thanks to everybody joining us, watching, listening, and I hope to share a cigar with all of you very, very soon. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.